line, but there are additional things to do on that line. Are we doing okay with the concepts? Okay. So this is telling me the cell J16 is telling me not only that I have to go back to line 9, but when I get back to line 9, the invocation on the left-hand side is already done. It is replaced by a single value of 6. But I still cannot perform the multiplication because I have the other invocation on the right-hand side. So I have to invoke again immediately. Because I cannot actually perform the return statement. I cannot perform the multiplication. I have to invoke S5 one more time. So that means I have to reallocate column J for the purpose of return info again. I have to reallocate column K as parameter n. I have to reallocate x as parameter x. Is that okay? It just so happens that the same columns were used for exactly the same purpose, but that is not guaranteed. Okay, it's not guaranteed because it is possible that I give you a program where the recursion, another recursion, where the invocation, one will invoke S5, the other one can invoke S6, a different subroutine. If I invoke a different subroutine, they may not have the same number of parameters, or even the same, the nature of the parameters may not be the same either. It just so happens that in this case, in most of our examples, we use the same subroutine, and as a result, we reuse the same columns for the same purpose. Okay. But what you put in the return info cell is now different because we know that we cannot perform the return just yet. The first part is already resolved as 6. We cannot perform the multiplication, and that's because we are dealing with the second or the right-hand side invocation. And as a result, the right invocation is replaced by a single question mark as a placeholder. Are we doing okay with this? Okay. Now n is going to be 0 again, and that has to do with, let me see if I can display that a little bit better here. And that's because I am actually using the context of GH and I to execute the code to specify parameter n. So I'm using column H as the end of the left-hand side of the right arrow. 1 minus 1 is 0, and that's why column K is now going to have a value of 0 again. And then X is passed by reference. It is going to be a reference to exactly the same thing again. Are there any questions about how we set up column J, K, and L this time? Yep.
If that had been invoked as 7, then I could not use J, K, and L again. I'd have to use...
No. You still use column J at least, but how you use the additional columns is entirely up to the other subroutine. If the other subroutine has like 6 parameters, then you have to use up K, L, M, N, O, P. If the other subroutine has no parameters, which is possible, then you only have to specify the return info. The point is, you have to reuse the columns that you have deallocated, and you have to follow the order of using the leftmost available column first. Okay. So now that we have set up columns J, K, and L, we can continue execution in the subroutine starting on line 4 again. Now, this is nothing new. Line 4 is going to say n equals to 0 is true because column K does have a value of 0. That means we continue execution on line 5. Line 5 is just adding 1 to X. X is a reference to column C. Column C, well, let me scroll to find out what its current value is. Column C has a value of 6 right now, so adding 1 to it will make it 7. Is that okay? And that's why I will tell you right away that it will not return the same value because every time before I return X, it gets changed. So on line 6, when we actually perform return X, what are we doing when we execute a return statement? When we execute a return statement, we find a return info cell, copy and paste it, and change the question mark to a specific value because we are resolving the return value of that invocation. In this case, and we also always use the rightmost return info column. In this case, the rightmost return info column is column J. So that's what we'll do. We'll copy column J, or in this case, to be more specific, J19. We'll copy it and paste it, change the question mark to the value that we are returning. What are we returning? We're returning a value of 7, and in this case, it's returning 6 times 7. But you don't want to change 6 times 7 to, 42? We don't want to do the calculation. We are not doing any type of calculation. We are not carrying out the operation here. We are only resolving the unknown. Okay, that is very important because I can see from the previous homework assignment, some people try to resolve things too early, and as a result, the answer is incorrect. After line 6, we are done with the then branch of the conditional statement. We get out of the conditional statement, we go to the end of the subroutine. We deallocate these 3 columns. They are no longer in use. And then where do we go? According to the return info cell, we have to go back to line 9. Very good. But line 9 now looks like this. Okay? Now it looks like return 6 times 7. Do I have any more invocations to deal with? Can I actually go ahead and return this time?
Yes.
After I calculate 6 times 7, which is 42, I'm ready to return. So effectively, when I get back to line 9 again on row 24 of the trace, I am executing return 42. So remind me again, what does it mean to execute a return statement? To execute a return statement means you have to find the rightmost return info cell, copy and paste it, and replace the question mark with the value that you're returning. So first of all, we have to decide which return info cell are we dealing with. Column J is not an option anymore because it is already deallocated. So that means column G is my rightmost return info cell. I copy and paste it. Okay. And the second thing we have to do is to replace the question mark. Oops, I picked the wrong one. I'm sorry. Yep. Nope. I did it right. I was confusing myself. Okay. That's the only one available. And then we replace the question mark with the value that we are returning. What value are we returning again? 42. That's it. Okay. Go ahead.
Don't you remove the left side since you already did the return value for both sides already?
No. Nope. Okay, now
You already solved both invocations. Why do you still have the invocation?
let's go ahead and see what happens here. I only resolved both for the last invocation. In other words, for this particular line 9, I have resolved both of them, but not for this one. In other words, each invocation has its own return info cell to deal with. Just being able to deal with one doesn't mean that I'm done with the other one. Okay? That's why it is so important to both understand the concept and also just to execute the mechanism the way the mechanism is supposed to go. Okay? So we are done with the execution of line 9 because we found which return info cell to copy and paste and change the question mark to the value that we are supposed to return. So we are done with line 9 in this case. After line 9, we get out of the else branch of the conditional statement, and then we continue on line 11, which is the end of the subroutine. Oh, are we done?
No.
Actually, we are done in this case.
We still have the second invocation.
But do I execute line 9 like this here? Okay, so we're getting back to the question. What does a return statement do? That's the question, right? Okay, let's just roll back. I'm going to delete, the cell here, and then we go back to this point here. Okay. Are we convinced that we executed the right thing on line 9, which is row 24 of the trace? If we're not sure, we can scroll that off the screen, and then we continue. We roll time back one more thing. Okay, so we roll back to row 23 of the trace. Okay. Are we convinced that when we execute line 6, this is the proper result?
Yes.
We are okay with that, right? Okay, so row 22 is done. Row 23 should be okay because row 23, which is the execution of line 11, is just the end of a subroutine. We deallocate the columns. So that should be okay too, right? So now we keep going. We go to row 24. When we are done with the subroutine, at the end of the subroutine, we deallocate the columns. But then we have to decide where do we go to continue execution. Well, the way we decide where to go to continue execution is to take a look at the return info cell of the allocated column, right? So in this case, J22 tells me that I have to go back to line 9, and therefore we are going back to line 9. But not only that, not only are we going back to line 9, but line 9 has both invocations already resolved at this point, which means the left-hand side is a value of 6, the right-hand side is a value of 7. Both invocations are basically done for this particular invocation. So that means we are ready to actually go ahead and execute the return statement. So once again, using the English grammar structure terms, this is my verb. J22 is my verb. It tells me what I'm supposed to do. Cell G9 is my object. Okay, this is what the action is acting on, and the result is G24. Because all we are doing is we are copying and pasting the entire cell, but change the question mark to the value that we are returning. Are we doing okay so far? Okay, let me just point out again. This is my verb. It tells me that I have to execute a return statement. In fact, we're returning a value of 42. That means I have to go find a return info cell, which turns out to be G9 in this case, copy and paste it, and change the question mark to 42, which makes G24 the result of the return statement.
Okay, so you said G9 was our object, right?
G9 is our object. It is
That's
the.
what we're acting on.
Yes.
Since X is returned to X and X is returned by reference.
No. X has nothing to do with this now. See, X has nothing to do with return statements. X is passed by reference, but in this case, it has nothing to do with the mechanism of returning a value.
Well, aren't they all together? Whenever we invoke, we have all 3 columns. When we deallocate, all 3 columns. So don't
Yes,
all
we do.
3 columns get returned together?
No. The columns don't return. The columns are just deallocated. That's all we do to the columns, is just to say, oh, these columns are no longer in use. They can be reused later on if we need to.
Okay.
Yep.
If on the column that's on the rightmost side, the one we deallocated once, does that go back to the question mark or the question mark on the left-hand side on that one, the previous one?
Can you name the column that you're talking about?
J, K, and L. If you go up at that deallocation, after that.
That's the deallocation, and then we basically reallocated the same columns immediately.
Yeah, but that refers to after that deallocation. We refer to the one that's